War does not determine who is right, only who is left. Storm, slow down! Harmony called out as I raced down the hall towards the elevators. I just want to explain what's going on. Y'all can't just go running around saying something like that without saying nothing else. I can't explain. I snapped at her as I matched the elevator panel with my hoof. We have to get word to Sunshine City. Her hoof wrapped around mine and held it still. I'd been about to tell her to let me go when the elevator gave off a ding. The rusted and squeaky doors rolled back to reveal Longbow inside, already wearing a tarnished silver suit of power armor. She looked at me with worry in her eyes. Sunshine City, right? Her gaze moved to Harmony. Stay here. Now, y'all listen here. Harmony grunted as she pushed the two of us into the elevator. If something's wrong with my home, then I ain't gonna just sit around. Stuck between a suit of bulky power armor and the strongest mare I know, I've never been so cramped before in my life. With a firm press of her hoof, she hit the lobby level button and waited for the doors to close. Would one of y'all at least like to tell me what in the hay is even going on? The Necromancer's going to attack Sunshine City. I spoke up. The Necromancer? Harmony almost sounded surprised. But on my monitors... She looked unfocused as she thought, her eyes going wide as the elevator showed. Goddesses. Are they... Mom? Could you use the words, maybe? Harmony rolled her eyes through the air impatiently. Sorry. Longbow shook her head, returning to her worried gaze to us. My monitors didn't show ponies on the ground, but an enclave raptor headed for the city. A whole raptor. This was news enough that I had a hard time even saying that. How? Where did it... As much as I didn't want to entertain the thought, the only enclave I'd seen down here was Shadow's fiancé. How do we fight something like that? I don't know, Longbow said softly. The elevator came to a stop, and the doors slid open. The lobby was a flurry of tower ponies, quickly trotting back and forth with supplies. Others hurriedly secured metal shutters over the many businesses that occupied the foyer. The tower's on lockdown from this point on. The refugees outside are going to panic as soon as the fighting starts. Even from this far, they'll be able to see what's coming. So, they haven't attacked yet. Harmony sounded like she at least hoped that we had stepped out. That's good, right? I mean, maybe they'll just up and leave us alone. Longbow shook her head and nodded for us to follow her. No, they've turned the raptor broadside to the city, and are waiting. For what, I don't know. She's waiting for the strike teams. Shadow came trotting down from one of the entrances outside. He's already gotten onto his power armor and met us here. If this weren't such a dire situation, I'd have told him I was impressed. She. Longbow snorted without even trying to hide her disdain for him. Great. All I need is another crazy Enclave commander like Silver Star in my life, coming down to ruin my day. Shadow stiffened up and nearly dove at Longbow. He shoved her against the marble wall hard enough that it shattered from the impact. How do you know that name? He snarled at her. Shadow! I snapped and stepped forward toward him. The scorpion-like tail on his armor twisted and snaked in front of me. Let her go! The sharp blade on the tail glinted in the hall lights, but didn't move from my path. Not until she tells me, he growled. It wasn't until Harmony pressed the barrel of her shotgun against the side of his head that he even took his furious gaze off of Longbow. Y'all might want to reconsider that. Harmony sounded to me like she was the most pissed off of all of us. I hadn't known what had gotten into him, but 3-on-1 odds were finally enough to make him take a small step back. I ran into her years ago, Longbow said as she pushed Shadow away from her, with the ease that only power armor could afford. Stupid cheat suits. I'd love to tell you the story, but if we don't get moving, ponies are going to die. Hate to dampen the mood, Prettius called out as he trotted down the hall. Alongside him trotted the still heavily bandaged Gage. She was still using tasteless cyberleg, but seeing as the ghoul herself was still out of in the fight in the infirmary, it would have to do. But It's a half-hour's trot back there. If they're waiting on the strike teams, then we have minutes at most, Shadow remarked. Which is why I was eternally grateful that an old friend had stopped by last night. Longbow sighed and continued towards the doors. Shadow will take us via Ditzy-Doo's skycart. We won't be able to drop into the city on account of their anti-air defenses, so you'll have to drop us a block away. We'll use that to our advantage, and use it as our fallback point. She propped up the door and waved over to us. We do this quick. Strike fast and hard enough to draw their attentions away on us, and we'll buy the city enough time to evacuate. As the others went outside, I watched as the friendly, wall-eyed Pegasus ghoul carefully landed a skycart down on the dirt. Most of the refugees in the camp seemed to wonder what was going on, but none of them showed any immediate concern. I remembered that I still owed Ditzy for the pip-buck she delivered me, but I knew she understood the gravity of the situation we were all in. I put my foreleg up and onto Longbow's shoulder as I approached the door. What you said back there in the elevator, you mean to suspect the Enclave is working with the Necromancer? She nodded. I don't know how you knew the city would be under attack, but if you were to tell me the Necromancer told you this would happen, I'd believe you. She sighed and brushed her striped mane from her face. If he managed to turn the whole bunker of Steel Rangers to his side, I can only imagine what would be possible to turn the Enclave Raptor commander as well. Then, you know that trying to pull their attention won't work. I watched as the others loaded up into the skycart, all except for Gage, who stood there tapping her hoof impatiently. He's attacking Sunshine City because he knows it's important to me. Even so, we have to save as many as we can. Longbow turned and looked at me with worried eyes that had seen more pain and suffering than I hopefully ever will, yet still carried the light of hope in them. I've seen what you've done, and I believe in the idea that you can be the pony to lead everyone through this. I hope so. I turned back towards the skycart, watching as Grumpy floated around the corner of the refugee camp. As it floated up to Gage, she gave it an annoyed smack and pointed it to the back of the cart. With an almost sad sag in its 3 motorized glowing eyes, it hovered up and inside. The elevator chimed behind us, and out from it stepped Ficha. He looked around hastily for a moment before spotting us. He looked geared up, and as much as I didn't want to ask him, I knew he was on board with going with us. On his back, draped over his own weapon, I found him carrying Skyline's battle saddle. They're ready, just as you asked, he shouted over as he trotted to us. When they begin the attack, the evacuation will start. Why not evacuate now? I asked at the risk of sounding stupid. If we start now, we risk forcing their attack. Longbow spoke as she stepped out of the doorway, both Ficha and I hot on her tail. While they need time to prepare, so do we. She tossed a quick glance behind me. She checked over the sniper rifles mounted on her armor. You did get Vox to contact the Rangers as well, right? Correct. He nodded as we approached the back of the skycart. It looked much smaller on the inside than it had from the door, and with every pony outside of Shadow crammed in there, it looked like it was going to be more cramped on the elevator ride. Shadow, I have something for you. Ficha turned and pulled Skyline's saddle off of him, holding it out. Seeing as you don't have any weapons, you might want to make use of these. Shadow looked at them before looking over to me with an uncertain gaze. He had sacrificed his own weapons in order to protect us all, and he saved my life in doing so. I couldn't speak for Skyline, but I think that if any pony deserved to use her guns, it would have been him. I gave him a small nod and turned to walk inside the cart. With little warning, I found myself being held in a very squishy embrace. Ditzy offered a sad smile along with her hug, and I simply patted her on the back. She was a small miracle in the wasteland, and never once had I seen her without a smile. Sky and Ditzy had been rival traders, but good friends over the years, and I think I understood why. She stood by those she knew, and she understood at heart why we did what we had to do. Thank you, Ditzy, I whispered, for everything. We'll try to bring this cart back intact. Longbow spoke with a smirk as she walked up the rear ramp of the cart. Poking her head around the back, she eyed over to Shadow. You sure you can fly one of these things? A few years back, I took an evaluation course to be the pilot for a sky tank. Shadow called back with a hint of hesitation in his words. With Skyline's gun strapped to his armor, he trotted up to the puller's position of the cart. How different could this be? As it turns out, it can be a whole lot different than a sky tank. Sorry for the bumpy ride, folks. Shadow called back. This thing's a touch more sensitive than the sky tank trainer I flew. Prettiest rolled his eyes in annoyance, wedged between Gage's robot and the young mare herself. She looked like she was about to be sick, and the green color she gained really contrasted the purple in her coat. The teams must be ready. So, what is she waiting for? Longbow muttered beside me. I turned to find her looking to the floor, presumably lost in her own thoughts. Something isn't right here. Waiting for us to make the first move, perhaps? Feacha offered. No, Breedis gave out sternly. She wants us to watch. Shadow set us down. Further away, I shouted up to him. I don't know if he heard me through the wind, but I thought that Breedis' idea had some merit to it. Feacha specifically chose this place to harm me. That's Phileas, not Feacha. He wanted me to be there when it happened. With a sharp jolt and a jostling shudder that resonated through the old cart, we pitched downward. The levitation talismans under us whined as we pulled back up, our momentum still carrying us down. In what was the sharpest landing they'd probably ever had to handle, the talismans slowed us just enough that we sat down with only a minor bump. The second we were down, Gage bolted for the back door. She clawed at it furiously with her hooves, pushing it down as fast as the old pistons would let it open. It wasn't fast enough, however, as she whined and threw up her dinner all over the opening door. Good. Get it out now. Longbow sighed and pulled herself to her hooves sharply. What'll happen probably won't be pretty. We'll do what we can, but we can't save every pony. She turned and looked at me, giving me a look of understanding. Remember that. The readout in my vision shifted to pink, and Pi popped up in front of me. I'm happy to inform you that I have entered secure comms range for the Raptor. She seemed like she was back to her old self, no longer sounding as cold and calculating as she did when I spoke to her at the resort. I've managed to bypass their encryption algorithms, allowing you to listen, if you'd like. The lot of us, with the exception of Grumpy the robot, disembarked the old sky cart. The air felt colder this far from the tower, and the snow was coating the rubble was more heavily piled up here than it had been when we left for the resort. At the very least, it didn't look like any pony had been here, though, as there wasn't a single track to be found. Good. Prettiest nodded as he carefully made his way around Gage. We'll be able to see if DJ managed to get us our backup. I was about to ask what that meant, but Shadow interrupted me as he unhooked himself. From what I can see, it was a lenticular, all right. With a stretch of his wings, he hopped into the air and hovered for a moment. If we're lucky, they haven't taken her in for her refitting yet. The capacitors for the anti-dragon cannons are due to be replaced, and overheat after each shot. We'll have a window of 4 minutes between volleys. 4 minutes? Gage coughed out as she sat still huddled over her puddle of sick. That's it? It'll be enough. Harmony snorted. Okay, here's the order of action. Evacuation prep for the city has the foals and elderly sorted up in the garage. With the rubble all around it, I reckon it's the most fortified position in the city. It might take a volley from the cannons, but I'd rather not trust it taking a single shot more than that. It's priority number 1 for evacuation. Got it? We all nodded as she continued. Good. Adult civilians not fit for defense should be sheltered at the bar in the western end of town. She was remarkably calm as she spoke, looking around at each of us and using her hooves to keep our attention. Unlike me, she was a community leader, though through and through. They're next, but don't bother with an escort. Y'all just instruct them to flee and get to defending the city. The Rangers will know to concentrate their fire on the Enclave attackers who will be flying over the city. We need to cause casualties, convince them that we ain't worth attacking. She looked around at each of us and gave us a stern look. We can rebuild the city, but we can't lose too many folks doing so. Then, what are we waiting for? Feacha laughed. This night ain't getting any warmer. Isn't that right? He nudged Shadow, who was simply staring down at the dirt. I have to go. He spoke up. His eerie tone and blank stare made us all sit quietly for a moment, wanting to hear what the hell he meant. That's Iron Cross's ship. If she sees me, she might be distracted enough to slip up during the attack. Shadow? She still wants you dead. I won't risk... I stepped forward, but without warning, Longbow's hoof reached out and stopped me. Any advantage might save a live, Storm, even if it's a couple of seconds. She kept her hoof pressed against me, and she tensed up as she spoke. Silver Star deviated from protocol when she attacked us before, and that was because she was too focused on her emotions to see clearly. She's right, Storm. Shadow's stern gaze shifted up to Longbow. Silver's daughters are just as prone to emotional outbursts as well. A smirk crept across his muzzle, slowly as her gaze locked on his. So, you're that grounder mare that she was always bitching about? She never let what happened go, you know that? Told her daughters to keep searching for the whole lot of you all these years. She's probably up there now, watching this unfold. That's right. Longbow snorted. To be honest, I'd hoped she'd forgotten about what happened those long years ago. She paused with a short gasp. Shortstaff. What? Harmony turned and looked at her with a puzzled expression. What about him? He's the spitting image of his father. She snapped, turning around and bolting away faster than any mare her age had right to. All right, every pony get moving, I shouted, turning to bolt after her. My heart beat against my chest for a moment. I caught as my hoof slammed down in the broken and snow-covered pavement. Shadow dipped a bound along his flight path, cruising next to me for a moment. I caught his worried gaze and returned one of my own to him. Be safe. He nodded and pulled away, gaining altitude and speed as he flapped hard. I love you. We had so much to lose. The bright red beams arced through this night sky, turning the old rubble-filled streets a dull red. As we raced towards the northern city, the beams cut through the western defenses like a hot knife through butter. Even from 2 blocks away, the scent of ozone was so thick in the air that I couldn't even breathe without tasting it. The night air filled with screams of pain and panic as the light dimmed and the beams flickered out. A window popped up in my pip vision, a countdown timer handily put up by Pi. 4 minutes, I thought to myself. Even with that fact that I had been patched up, there was no way I was going to keep up with Longbow. I'd lost sight of her well before I even rounded the last block, and I could see a mare-sized hole she'd left in the sheet metal gate. Above the gate, I noticed a pair of silver flashes streak by. Chariots flew over the city, and only seconds after they passed over, a line of explosions tore through the streets. Another silver flash caught my vision, but this one came from my side. Fecha stormed past me, galloping ahead with his sword grasped tightly in his jaw. He reached the gate moments before me, slipping through and disappearing into the smoke in the street beyond. With a deft leap, I too entered the city. Gunfire erupted all around me, as Steel Rangers took up defensive positions around the street. Never before have I been so relieved to see the metal-clad ponies appear from seemingly nowhere. The low drone of a minigun was sharply followed by the bright multicolored explosion. A twisted wreck of a chariot slammed down through the sheet metal shack on the street, sending a pillar of flame and smoke up into the sky. I skid to a stop as a pair of bright beams lanced the dirt right next to me, narrowly missing me. I looked up as fast enough to catch a blur fly above me, passing over me to attack the rangers down the street. One of the beams struck a robed ranger in the chest, right as her anti-machine rifle punched a bloody hole through the Enclave soldier's head. The mare screamed as she glowed brightly before whisking away into pink ashes. From my pep-buck radio, the quick and decisive reports came across the Enclave channels. Outside of a soft ringing in my ears, I froze up. I'd thought I knew what it felt like before, but this was war. Not like Dodge or Chasm, and not street fighting against raiders. This wasn't just one-sided fighting for survival. This was an all-out fight for eradication. No emotions about this, no hesitation, just kill the enemy even if you went down swinging. This was what I was bred to do, wasn't it? This was my purpose that would have been had if my powers showed themselves to be controllable during the war. My vision twisted and tumbled to my side as a pony barreled into me. It knocked me from my thoughts and back into the fight. The pony whined and kicked at me as he got back to his hooves in panic. A high-pitched whine filled the air, and a red beam lanced across his back. He let out a scream before collapsing next to me. The soldier who hit him zipped past overhead. Proteus jumped to the city gate, wide-eyed in fear as he watched me climb to my hooves. As much as I wanted to keep staring at him, I found my eyes drawn back to the stallion next to me. His eyes were still and unfocused, his body rigid and unmoving. "Storm, we have to get to the garage!" He snapped and smacked me in the cheek. "Come on, move!" A beep from my pit buck prompted me to look at the timer in my vision. 3 minutes, I thought again. Yeah. I turned my gaze away from the stallion and down the street. Another set of explosions erupted from the south, illuminating the night once more. The two of us got moving, galloping down the street towards the monolithic form of the garage. Another silver flash passed over us, this one traveling lower than the others. It wasn't a chariot, but what looked like a large, bulbous shell with a gun sticking out of it. Careful, it maneuvered over the top of the garage and set down without even taking a hit. No, no, no! I screamed out as I pushed myself even harder to get there. I refused to lose anybody else in this fight. The Enclave wouldn't slaughter helpless colts and fillies, even if I had to throw myself onto their guns to do so. A bright blue flash of a pony zipped around the street ahead of us. Thatcher tore through the streets towards the garage, quickly followed by the bulky form of Longbow hot on his hooves. With little regard, he slammed into the door of the place, the door splintering and broke open against his weight. Proteus and I joined Longbow, squeezing in through the erected doorway with little regard for ourselves. The huddled masses of young ponies inside gasped at our entrance, cowering in the corner. The sound of a scuffle up the stairs to the kitchen got us moving again without even a word. "That's far enough!" The bitchy and arrogant voice of Iron Cross was one that I'd hoped to never hear again. "Mom was right about this place being where you stayed." She laughed as I pushed myself to the stairs. "You expect to win?" Shortstaff snorted. "We have you outnumbered." Reaching the kitchen, an odd scene sat before me. An Enclave soldier had Shortstaff restrained in his grasp. His power armor energy rifles pressed against his back stiffly. Next to him sat Iron Cross. She too was in a suit of power armor, but hers didn't have any weapons on it. Instead, the scorpion-like tail on her suit was wrapped around Thatcher's son's neck, the blade pointed precariously close to the side of his head. Thatcher, Longbow, and now Preet and I stood across the room from her. "Oh, I think you misunderstood why I'm here." She smiled as she spoke, her hate-filled red eyes turning to me. "Oh, what a surprise!" She laughed lightly. "Of course Mother said this was all for you." "She's being controlled." I spoke plainly. "Felix is just using her." "Oh, I know that." She laughed with the same mirth as Tempest had during our little game. "I made a deal with Phileas. I knew Shadow was still alive and that he needed you out of the picture." She traced the tail blade around Huckleberry's face, eliciting a sharp whimper from him. "And like a moth to the flame, he knew you'd bring him right here." "So let my son go," Thatcher demanded. With another beep, the timer counted down to halfway. "See, there was one more requirement for our deal." She canted her head as she looked right at me. "He needed her to suffer." The room glowed bright red, and the air itself heated like we'd been placed in an oven. The crackle of energy filled the air as screams erupted from outside. I had to shield myself from the light that poured in through the window, the fur on my forehoof feeling like it was melting from the intense heat. With a quick flicker, the beams died down again. "What happened 4 minutes?" Longbow growled through her clenched teeth. Iron simply shook her head. "You ground folk are such simpletons. Only an amateur commander would commit all the guns to fire at once." She paused and put her hoof to her ear. The most grotesque smile pulled across her muzzle. "And I hope there was no pony in the bar that you cared for?" The radio in my pip-buck crackled and silenced the constant soft chatter from the Enclave attackers. "This is the Raptor Mammatus." The words wiped the smile away from Iron's face. "Raptor Lenticular, you are engaged in an unsanctioned assault. Cease and desist your actions, or we will fire upon you." Iron raised her forehoof and spoke into it. "This is the captain. Belay that order and continue the assault until I return." "Fucking cunt!" Longbow snapped, leveling her rifles at Iron. Everything then went so wrong, so fast. Iron's tail drove through the side of Huckleberry's head effortlessly. Longbow locked up as Iron dropped his lifeless body and Thatcher screamed out. The other soldier fired a pair of shots into the back of Shortstaff, who collapsed forward onto the floor in pain. Prettius dove forward at the soldier, his horn firing a red beam right into the muzzle of the stallion. Longbow's rifles fired off, blinding me momentarily with the muzzle flash from them. Iron screamed out in pain as she twisted towards the kitchen window. A bloody hole punched through her side and splattering blood onto the wall behind her. Thatcher ran to her, nothing but pure rage filling his eyes as he did. Prettius screamed out in pain as the soldier who was fighting used his tail to snap his foreleg backwards. Longbow's rifles fired again, this time firing right across my front at the soldier. Again, I was blinded by the flash. The soldier's helmet had split almost in half, and the exposed half of his head was a smoking hole from where Longbow's rounds punched through it. At this point, everything crawled to a stop. Time froze. My vision shifted to a deep blue color, and Pi appeared curled up in the corner. "Storm?" She sniffled as she talked. You have to do something, Storm." What could I do? Every time I tried, every pony I wanted to save ended up dead. Thatcher's son didn't have to die, but it was my fault that he had been involved in this. "No, this is what he wants," Pi whined, climbing to her hooves. "You have to act, sis. You can't sit here like he wants you to do." I didn't even know what I was supposed to do anymore. Phileas had the amulet. No pony knew where he was, and I couldn't even stop one single fucking mare from slaughtering countless innocent ponies. "You can try." Pi sniffled, forcing my vision to shift across the room. Bleeding and halfway through the window, Iron Cross stared back with an endless scowl at Thatcher. He'd gotten up to her and was desperately trying to drag her back through the window. The set's targeting overlay highlighted the two of them. In the lower right hoof-hand corner of my vision, under Pi, flashed the words, "Bon appetit." I knew what she wanted me to do, and I thought about pulling the bullet between Iron's eyes. The system registered that it would take only half the spell power to do so, and that I only had a 25% chance to hit her at all. Thatcher, on the other hoof, had a 36% chance to be hit instead. Rather than risk hitting him, I had to rely on the spell to guide the one round I had to its proper home. I wouldn't chance on killing Thatcher when he still had his other son, Finn, to raise. I accepted the spell and watched it resolve. It guided my muzzle down and over to the revolver's chocolate-tasting grip, drawing it up and out of its home in one fluid motion. Slowly it swung up, the whole room itself shifting in the altered time. I watched in horror as the spell of Iron's tail rose up to strike, the sharp blade glinting in the flickering lights from the fires that burned outside. With a sharp, distorted report, the single shot rang out from my gun. Even in the slowed-down flow of time, my round traveled across the room in the blink of an eye. The soft lead round slammed into the armored tail appendage, not even leaving a scratch on it. Time slowly crept forward, starting to reorientate itself. With my attack failed and Iron still alive, her bladed tail shot forward, the curved blade embedding itself through Thatcher's eye, and pointing the tip of it emerging through the back of his head as he went rigid. My gun slipped from my muzzle as a blade slipped out of his corpse. An Iron Cross slipped from sight out the window. I sat down hard as my gun clattered across the floorboards, my head blank from the events that had just unfolded. Longbow pushed past me as she rushed to her son. She was screaming things at him as she levitated out medical supplies from her armor to him. Critias whined out in pain from the floor beside her, cradling his twisted foreleg. All the while, across the floor lay the 2 bodies of the ponies who didn't deserve this. The ringing in my ears drowned out the rest of the world as I just sat on the floor and stared out of the window. If this was what war felt like, I don't know how ponykind managed it for 10 years. Even so, maybe what ended the world a century and a half ago was less of a tragedy and more of a mercy. Amidst the ringing, a soft voice called out from the depths of my mind, and despite how unfocused I felt, I grasped onto those words and listened to them like everything that I had depended on it. "You cannot save every pony." It was the voice of Mama. "Others still require your help. Go to them." Without thinking, I stood up, turned around, and did just that. No thoughts in my mind, just the drive to help others. I practically flew down the stairs and out into the streets, running down towards the sound of screams. In the sky, the second cloud ship hung above us, sitting between us and the retreating Pegasus force. I doubted that this would be the last time I'd see Iron Cross, but I knew that the next time we met, I would end her life without so much as a thought. My mind felt scattered without the feelings I normally had running around in it. I moved through the streets in a daze, helping pony after pony from the rubble. I glossed over those who were already dead in an attempt to help those who could still be alive. Part of me knew that I needed to keep moving, that the more I helped, the less everything fazed me overall. My friends had spoken to me while I worked, but I simply ignored them and worked. Even Shadow had come back to me. Still, I found myself unable to stop from doing what I could for the wounded. I didn't have time to talk, because I was still very much alive. Others didn't have this luxury, and I intended to fix that. As the sun crept over the wasteland, I finally had exhausted all my strength and laid myself down to rest. It was on a dirty mattress in one of the ruined shacks in town. I didn't know who it belonged to, but for now, it was mine. Closing my eyes, I sat in a blissful darkness and listened to the soft ringing in my mind as it carried me off to sleep. It was simply the end to another day for me. Tomorrow, I'd get up and try again. Tomorrow, I thought to myself, tomorrow, we'll win this war. Chapter end. What's beginning is the war that will force this divide. Quests finished and started, none. Levels and perks earned, none.